Hey everyone, welcome back to another A Country Girls Designs video. And today we will be discussing our newest pattern on the loom. And this is the twisted knit sock or slipper sock. It is a very thick yarn with a heel. And what we used is the Deborah Norval line, Serenity Chunky, in the color Spring. You will require 2 skeins for this. It is a chunky weight number 5. We used a 24 peg Cindy Wood loom, and this is the 5/8 gauge. You will need your knitting tool, 2 stitch markers, scissors, whatever else that you like to use for the project. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is prepare your loom. Now, I do have these other stitch markers on here. Ignore those. That is for a different project. You will only require 2 stitch markers. You will need one at peg 1 and peg 12. Peg 1 and peg 12. And that is for when we do the heel shaping later. When I cast on, I use the chain cast on. So my marked peg is actually the last peg in my round. So however you cast on, just make sure that your stitch marker is on peg 1 and peg 12. Okay, so the pattern PDF will be in the description. This will be a free pattern. And we will go ahead and get started with the cast on. Now the cast on that I choose to use is the chain cast on. I just like the way that the edge looks more finished. You can use any cast on with this that you prefer. Just keep in mind that if you do the chain cast on, you want to start and go in the opposite direction that you are comfortable working on. So for me, I personally feel more comfortable doing purls clockwise. So I will do my chain cast on counterclockwise. So here we go. The first thing you do is make your slip knot. You put your loop behind your first peg. Now again, keep in mind, because you're going the opposite direction, this will be your last peg. So the first peg of your cast on will be the last peg of your round, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I personally just like to use the marked peg, at least on this loom, as my last, but however you like to do it is fine. So you put your loop behind, you draw your working yarn, that's the yarn connected to your skein, you draw that through the loop. Now the first one is a little harder to do because nothing's connected. You take that loop again, and now you put it behind your second peg. And you draw your working yarn through. So now that you have one on the second peg, you can pull this tail a little tighter. Now you can see that the stitch actually looks normal. Okay? Again, you put your loop behind the peg, and draw your working yarn through. This is called the chain cast on. You can also do this with a crochet hook. I just find it a lot easier to do it this way. Again, the loop behind the peg, draw your working yarn through. And your loop will get longer as you go, so you can pull the working yarn to make it a little tighter, smaller. Working yarn through. Loop behind, and working yarn through. Now continue to do that all the way around your loom. And when we get over here to this side, I'll show you what to do. Okay, so now we're back to the other side. If we were doing a flat panel, I would just pop that loop right on that last peg and pull it tight. But because we're doing this in a round, I will go ahead and put the loop behind, pull the working yarn through like we did all the way around, and just pop that loop over here onto the last peg. Okay, so basically this pattern consists of the rib stitch, but it alternates every 6th row. And by doing that, it makes it twisted. And the beauty of the twist is that it makes it looser, more conforming to your foot, and warm. Now, I did have some requests from my last tube sock that I made to do a heel. So this one does incorporate the heel in it as well. If you do not want to do the heel, just skip the heel instruction part of the video and continue to do the twisted knit stitch. Okay, so the first part of the pattern calls for a knit 2, purl 2 for 5 rows. So just in case you're not familiar with the knit stitch, the first 5 rows will be a flat knit. So you put your working yarn above the yarn that is already on the peg, flip that loop over. Again, working yarn in front, flip the loop over. And that is how you do the knit stitch. For the purl stitch, you bring your working yarn down, put your tool behind the loop coming down, grab that stitch, pull it through, you take your old loop off and put your new loop on. So I'll try to show you that again. Pull it through, old loop off, new loop on. Okay? Okay, so you continue to do that for 5 rounds. Then the pattern shifts, which is what creates the twisted part of the sock. So in round 6, you're going to start with a purl. Then you will knit 2, purl 2 until the last 3 stitches, which will be a knit 2, purl 1. So what that does is you'll still be in the knit 2, purl 2 sequence. You'll just have a purl here on your first peg and a purl on your last peg. And you continue to do that until you get to round 11. Now in round 11 is where we start with the E-wrap stitch for the knit. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted the top cuff to be a little bit tighter so that wherever it sits on you, it'll conform, because you know we don't like slouchy socks. So when you get to round 11, I will show you how to work the E-wrap stitch. Okay, so at this point you should have finished rounds 1 through 10. Our next part of the pattern is rounds 11 through 15, where I will show you how to do the E-wrap stitch. So if you are familiar with the E-wrap stitch, you can fast forward just a titch to the heel shaping. This part of the video is more for people who are not familiar with how to do the E-wrap. So for rounds 11 through 15, it says to purl 2, E-wrap 2. So the first 2 stitches, you bring your working yarn through the loop. You take your old loop off, put the new loop on. Working yarn is below. You draw up your loop. Old loop off, new loop on. Now the E-wrap stitch, all you do is you take your working yarn, you go behind your peg, wrap it around, and that's how you do it. You see it kind of makes like a cursive E. So you will have 2 of those. So you wrap your next 2 stitches and just flip the bottom loop over. And that is how you E-wrap your stitches. Now, some of the pattern may say E-wrap and knit off. So when it says that, it basically means you wrap it and you flip your loop over. Okay, so continue to follow the pattern until we get to the heel shaping. And from there, I will show you what to do next. Okay, so now we're going to start working on the heel shaping. You should have your marker at peg 1 and 1 at peg 12. And we're only going to be working those pegs for the heel shaping. Okay? So we are going to E-wrap pegs 1 through 12. And we're going to knit those off. This is kind of an awkward way for me to hold this, so I'm doing the best I can so that you guys get a good visual. Okay, so we push those stitches down. Now, from here, we're going to E-wrap back. We're going to do that a total of 4 times, but we're going to skip the first peg each time. So that way that you have a nice border for later. So wrap your stitches back to your first marked peg. And we will knit those off. Okay, push all those stitches down. And we'll go back. We'll do the same thing we did, skipping that first peg. So, E-wrap all the way back to your stitch marker. Knit those off. Okay. All right, so we did 1, we did 2, we did 3. So this will be our last one that we go back. Again, we're going to skip the first peg, E-wrap back to your first stitch. And we're going to knit those off. Okay, push those stitches down. Now at this point, we have done our 4 rows of the E-wrap. Okay. So from here, the yarn will be at peg 1, your working yarn, and we are going to take the loop off of peg 12 and move it to peg 11. We're going to E-wrap back, skipping that first peg. E-wrap back to where you have your 2 stitches on peg 11. And we're going to treat those 2 stitches as one. Okay, continue to knit off the rest of the stitches. Push those down. Okay, so now your working yarn is back here at peg 11. We are going to move the stitch from peg 1 to peg 2. Okay, and now we're going to E-wrap and knit those off. Again, we're going to skip that first peg. Now, this is easier if I had a yarn tensioner or guide on there, but I forgot to put it on at the beginning of the project. Okay, so we're going to knit those off. Sometimes you do have to do one loop at a time, and that's okay. Knit all those off. Okay. So now, your working yarn is back here again at peg 2. And so we are going to move the stitch from peg 11 and put it onto peg 10. And E-wrap and knit off again. Again, skipping the first peg as you come back. Knit those off. Push your stitches down. Our working yarn's at this end, so that means we're going to move another stitch. We're going to move the stitch from peg 2 to peg 3. And we're going to continue to do this back and forth until we have 3 empty pegs. So now we E-wrap back and knit those off. And the reason why I'm kind of lifting that is just because that bottom stitch is a little too close. I don't want to snag it as I'm lifting that bottom stitch over the top. Okay. So we're going to push all those down again. And at this point, we're going to be moving the stitch from peg 10 onto peg 9. And again, we'll E-wrap back, skipping that first peg, and knit those off. Okay, so we have 3 empty pegs on this side. We need to do one more decrease on this side. So we're going to move the stitch from peg 3 onto peg 4. And sometimes you have to play around with it to get the stitch on there, but that's okay. Okay, so now we're going to E-wrap back and knit those off. Again, skipping the first one. And so at this point, what you're left with is 3 empty pegs on both sides and 6 pegs with stitches in the middle. Now this is what it looks like on the inside. So if you have anything similar to that, you are on the right track. And what we do from here is that we're going to go here on the inside and we're going to count. Now let me get this a little closer so you can see this. Okay. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That is why we skipped those stitches during the wrap, so that way they'd be easier to see to pick them up. So again, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to take that loop right here from number 5, and we're going to put it on to the peg, your ending peg of your round. Then you're just going to pick up your other stitches. Sometimes you have to play around with it to actually pick the stitch up, because you know you don't want to split the yarn. And we're just going to put those stitches back onto the peg. Okay? So you will fill those stitches back up, or excuse me, the empty pegs back up. So you'll have 1 now on each of your empty pegs, plus you'll have 1 extra. Now we're going to do the same thing on the opposite side. You count your 5 stitches. Sometimes you may have to turn it to see. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we're going to take the stitch from 5 and we're going to put it onto this peg right here. So that it actually is peg number 13 in your round. Okay? Then you just pick up the other empty stitches like we did on the other side to fill up those pegs. Kind of like what you would do if you were doing a seam in a hat or on a cuff of a sock. Okay, so at this point you should have put all the bind off stitches back onto the 3 empty pegs, the 1 extra stitch on the last peg of the round, and the 1 extra stitch on peg 13. So at this point, your working yarn is at peg number 4. You're going to E-wrap and knit those off. When you get to your last peg, treat those 2 stitches as 1. And then you will be done with your heel shaping. You can continue in the pattern to finish the sock. If you are using this heel shape in a pattern of your own or from into another pattern, at this point just continue with the pattern that you are using. On the next part of this video, I will show you how to do a closure for a toe that I use for all of my slipper socks. So the yarn may not be the same, but it is the same concept even for this twisted knit sock. And we are going to start with the actual cast off. Now, if you remember, because of the way I did my cast on, this is actually my ending peg and not my starting peg. So this is actually peg 1. So what we're going to do is move peg 4 to peg 3. And this is where it comes in that you need to do that last row of knitting as loosely as possible, because sometimes it's hard to maneuver these stitches. So I took the loop off of peg 4 and I'm going to place it onto peg 3. We're going to move 8 to 7. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then 12 to 11. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 16 to 15. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 20 to 19, so 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And sometimes it is a little hard to get that on there. And then finally 24, which is my last peg, to 23. That one is a little easier. So at this point, you should have 3 pegs with a stitch, 1 without, 3 with, 1 without, all the way around. And now we're going to flatten it. And again, you want to try to make this as loose as you can, because you will be moving pegs again in the next round. So you just knit off like you normally do your flat knit stitch. Then when you get to a peg that has 2, you just treat it as 1 stitch. You flip both of those off. Sometimes you'll have to do them one at a time, but that's okay. Now when you get to an empty peg, you just put your working yarn behind it and continue to knit those off, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, so now that you have knit those, we're going to start moving some more pegs. We are going to move number 2 to number 1. And don't worry, this is in the PDF and I will link it in the bottom. We're going to move number 6 to number 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's basically going to be your stitch in the middle that you're going to be moving. The stitch in the middle of your 3 stitch sequence. So then we're going to move number 10 to number 9. Number 14 to number 13. 18 to 17. And finally 22 to 21. So now what you're left with is 1 stitch on every other peg. Okay? Knit those the same way you did in the previous round, making sure that your working yarn is behind a peg that does not have a stitch on it, and treating both of those stitches as 1. Okay, at this point you have knit all the way around. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take your working yarn and you're going to wrap it around the loom 2 times. Take your scissors and cut your yarn. Just throw that back off to the side. Okay. So now you're going to take your looming tool, and what you're going to do is just draw the working yarn through the loop, almost like you would do when you were purling. Sorry for the noise in the background. That was my dog that just sneezed. So once you pull your working yarn through that loop, just pop the loop right off the peg. And we're going to do that for every other peg. Pull the working yarn through. Pop the loop off. Skip a peg to the next one. And you can cut your yarn shorter. I just prefer to have more than enough. Again, we're going to skip this peg and we're going to the next one. We're going to pull the working yarn through and pop that off. And what you're going to see at the top is it's starting to create like this star pattern. Skip this peg, go to the next one. We're just going to continue to do that all the way around. So we get back to our starting point. And when we get back to the starting point, we will just go back and work the ones that are still left on the pegs in the same manner. So working yarn through the loop, pull it off. Some people call this the drawstring cast on. I've seen it referred to as a flat drawstring cast, or not, excuse me, not cast on, but cast off. So this just makes an easy cast off for your toe. Okay, you got that one stitch left over here. We're going to pull it through, working yarn through, pop it off, and you're done. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like. At this point, I turn it inside out. Find your working yarn end from in the middle, pull it out, and you just kind of pull it tight. What that does is it closes the toe up. Now at this point, what I do is I look to see if there's any little areas in the toe that may need some extra yarn. I weave the working yarn in, clip it off, and voila, you have your sock. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel so you will be up to date on future projects. Thanks again, guys.